Anne of Green Gables, Chapter 17, The Big Exam. Anne, Marilla said one night in November. Miss Stacy was here today. Anne was lying on the hearthrug, gazing into the fire. She looked up at Marilla. Oh, I'm sorry, I was out. Anne said, Why was Miss Stacy here? She came to ask me if Matthew and I wanted you to join the class that is going to be studying for the entrance exam into Queen's Academy. What do you think? Would you like to go to Queen's and study to be a teacher? Oh, yes, Anne said. I would love to be a teacher, but won't it be too expensive to send me to Queen's? Don't worry about that, said Marilla. Matthew and I decided to put some money aside to send you to Queen's. We made up our mind to give you the best education we could. Anne hugged Marilla. Thank you. I'll study as hard as I can and make you proud of me. In the Queen's class were Anne, Gilbert, Ruby Jane, and Josie Pay. They stayed after school every day to study for the entrance exam. The rivalry between Anne and Gilbert was stronger than ever, but Gilbert paid no attention to Anne outside of class. He talked and laughed with other girls, and sometimes he walked home with them, but he completely ignored Anne. Anne did not like being ignored, but she knew it was her own fault. She didn't even feel angry at him anymore. She knew she had forgiven him and wanted to be his friend, but it was too late. When the last day of school was over, Anne carried her textbooks up to the attic. She stacked them in an old trunk and then locked the trunk and threw the key into the blanket box. I'm not going to look at textbook this whole vacation, she told Marilla. I have studied as hard as I could all term. I just want to have fun this summer. Anne went back to school in September, rested and ready to work hard again. In March, Anne turned 15. One day, Marilla was amazed to find that Anne was taller than she was. That night, Matthew came into the kitchen and was surprised to see Marilla crying. Marilla hardly ever cried. I was thinking about Anne, said Marilla. She's growing up so fast and she'll probably be away all next winter. I will really miss her, Matthew. But she'll be able to come back home often, Matthew said. Marilla sighed. It won't be the same as having her here all the time. Anne was looking forward to going to Queen's, but she still had to pass the entrance exam. In June, she and her classmates went to Charlestown to take the exam. Anne stayed with Miss Josephine Barry for the week. Anne arrived home on Friday evening. She was tired, but she knew she had done the best she could on the exam. I think I did pretty well in everything except geometry, Anne told Diana. I have a creepy feeling that I failed it. Oh, you pass all right, Diana said. Don't worry. But Anne wanted more than just to pass the exam. She wanted to come out ahead of Gilbert Blythe. She also wanted to be the best so that Matthew and Marilla would be proud of her. 3 weeks went by without a word. Then one day, Anne looked out her window and saw Diana running toward the house. She had a newspaper in her hand. Moments later, Diana burst into the room. Anne, you passed, she cried. You passed the very first. You and Gilbert tied, but your name is first. I can't believe it, Anne whispered. I hoped it would happen, but I never dreamed it really would. Chapter 18 The Scholarship. Anne went off to Queen's Academy in the fall. Miss Barry found her a boarding house to live in. Anne was very homesick for Green Gables at first. She was glad that Jane and Ruby and Josephine were at Queen's too. Anne was able to go home or to Miss Barry on weekends, and she made some new friends at school. Soon her homesickness wore off. She studied hard, hoping to win a scholarship to Redmond College. There were two scholarships, the Medal and the Avery. I know I won't win the Avery, Anne said to Jane after the final exams were over. Everyone says Emily Clay will get it. I'm not going to look at the bulletin board to see who won. You read it and then come and tell me. If I didn't win the scholarship, break it to me gently. Please, promise. Jane promised. The next moment, they saw a crowd of boys carrying Gilbert Blythe on their shoulders. Hooray for Blythe, medalist! They shouted. Anne's heart sank. She failed, and Gilbert had won. She knew Matthew would be sorry. He had been so sure she would win. And then somebody called out, 3 cheers for Anne Shirley, winner of the Avery. All the girls rushed up to Anne to congratulate her. Anne whispered to Jane, Matthew and Marilla will be so pleased. I have to write to them right away. Matthew and Marilla came to Queen's for Anne's graduation. They watched proudly as Anne read the best essay. Reckon you're glad we kept her, Marilla, whispered Matthew. It's not the first time I have been glad, Marilla snapped. You do like to rub things in, Matthew Cuthbert. Anne went home to Avonlea with Matthew and Marilla. Diana was at Green Gables to meet her. Oh, Diana, it's so good to be home again, Anne said, and to see you again. Are you going to teach now that you have owned the Avery? Diana asked. No, said Anne, I'm going to Redmond College in the fall, but first I'll have 3 wonderful months of vacation. The next morning at breakfast, Anne asked Marilla, Is Matthew all right? He looks as if he isn't feeling well. He has had a bad time with his heart, said Marilla. I'm worried about him. He works too hard. Maybe he will rest and get better now that you're home. You always cheer him up. That evening, Anne went with Matthew to bring the cows to the back pasture. You have been working too hard, Anne said. Why don't you take things easier? I guess I just keep forgetting that I'm getting old, Matthew said. Today, I wish I were the boy you and Marilla wanted, Anne said. I could help you so much now. Well, I'd rather have you than a dozen boys, Matthew said. It wasn't a boy who owned the scholarship, was it? It was a girl, my girl.